November 30, 1939. The morning frost cracked like breaking glass beneath the boots of an advancing army. 500,000 Soviet soldiers marched across the Finnish border in disciplined formations, their gray-green uniforms blending with the pale light of dawn. Their breath rose in heavy clouds, drifting skyward before vanishing into the icy Arctic air. For them, this was supposed to be simple. Their officers had promised they would be home by Christmas. The war would be a short, police action, something that would last no more than 2 weeks. At least, that was what Stalin himself had declared in Moscow's grand halls, but hidden among the snow-covered forests of Karelia, a quiet farmer was beginning his morning routine. He was unaware that, within hours, he would step into legend. His name was Simo. He stood just 5'3", a man of wiry build and weathered hands, but his small frame concealed a calm resolve that would soon terrify an empire. Simo was 34 years old, and his life until now had been ordinary. He was born in the small village of WWII, where winters were long, summers short, and survival always demanded patience and discipline. Each day, he rose before dawn to tend his family's animals, split wood for the fire, and hunt in the forests that had provided for generations of his people. His rifle, a Mosin Nagant passed down from his grandfather, was more familiar to him than his own heartbeat. With it, he had stalked deer and elk through snow as silent as falling feathers, learning the rhythm of stillness that only true hunters understand. On this particular morning, as he milked the family's cows, the sound of distant artillery thunder rolled across the countryside. It echoed like an approaching storm, shaking the wooden barn walls. The cows shifted nervously, their warm breath steaming in the cold air. Simo paused, listening, his pale eyes narrowing. The war that had been whispered about in kitchens and taverns was no longer rumor. It had arrived. His mother, Katri, appeared at the barn door, her face carved by years of hard labor and worry. She clutched a wooden rosary worn smooth by generations. "Simo, what was that noise?" she asked, her voice trembling. He answered evenly, though his heart tightened. "Artillery, mother. Soviet artillery." At that moment, the farmer who had never harmed another human being felt something harden inside him. A transformation was beginning, one that would change him from provider to protector, from hunter of game to hunter of men. In Moscow, Stalin's generals had spoken with arrogance. They looked at maps spread across long tables, moving little wooden blocks that represented men, tanks, and divisions. They told their leader that Finland would collapse in weeks, maybe even days. Comrade Stalin, Marshal Kliment Voroshilov declared confidently, "Our forces outnumber them 126 to 1. Our tanks are countless, our aircraft overwhelming. Their entire air force is smaller than what we lose in training accidents. This will not be a war, it will be a parade." Stalin's cold eyes lingered on the maps, his fingers tapping the routes that cut into Finland like knives. He wanted this victory to send a message to the world. And yet, in his calculations, he overlooked the resilience of a small nation, and the determination of one man who knew the forest better than any general's map. Back in WWII, Simo finished his chores and stepped into the modest farmhouse he had known since childhood. Above the stone fireplace hung his grandfather's rifle, its wood worn smooth by decades of use. He lifted it down with reverence, inspecting it as though greeting an old friend. It was a Mosin Nagant 1891-30, manufactured long before Simo was born. It bore scratches, imperfections, and scars of countless hunts. But in his hands it was flawless. He had spent years perfecting its sights, adjusting the iron alignment until it was more accurate than factory specifications. He never desired a telescopic scope. Scopes could fog in the cold, reflect sunlight, and reveal a sniper's position. His iron sights, humble as they were, made him invisible. He ran a cloth through the barrel, checked the bolt, and loaded 5 rounds of 7.62 x 54 mm ammunition into its magazine. Each cartridge gleamed, carefully inspected and polished. For a farmer, bullets had always been precious, the difference between feeding his family or going hungry. Now, they would be the difference between life and death. Before leaving, he pressed a kiss to his mother's forehead. She smelled faintly of lavender soap, a fragrance that clung to his childhood memories. "Where are you going, Simo?" she asked, though she already feared the answer. "To stop them," he said simply. "To protect our home." Then he stepped into the snow. His white winter coat blended with the drifts, his figure vanishing into the trees. His mother stood in the doorway, clutching her rosary, unaware she was watching her son become a legend the world would call the White Death. The temperature that first night dropped to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to freeze exposed skin within minutes. Soviet soldiers, many drawn from warmer regions of the USSR, struggled in the Arctic conditions. Their heavy boots crunched loudly with every step, their steel helmets clinked when struck by falling ice, and their breath rose in great plumes, clear targets for any sharp eye. But for Simo, this was simply another winter. He moved like a ghost between trees, his body accustomed to the bitter air. He had learned as a hunter that patience was survival. He could remain still for hours, his heartbeat slowing, his breath controlled until it barely moved his chest. That night, he studied Soviet patrol patterns, watching them with predator's eyes. He memorized their routines, the routes they favored, the way they carried themselves. To Simo, they were not soldiers but prey. The first patrol he encountered consisted of 12 men marching down a road once used for logging. They laughed, smoked, and joked, believing the Finns were already beaten. Their sergeant, a veteran of Spain's Civil War, had told them resistance would crumble within days. From his hidden position behind a fallen log, Simo steadied his rifle. His iron sights aligned with the sergeant's chest. One breath in, half out, hold. The crack of the rifle echoed like thunder. The sergeant collapsed instantly, his heart pierced. The remaining men panicked, diving for cover, firing wildly into empty snow. They screamed orders in Russian, but there was nothing to see, no muzzle flash, no movement, no sound but the wind. Simo was already gone, sliding to his secondary position 200 yards away. Another shot rang out, then another, each one striking with surgical precision. Within minutes, all 12 men lay silent in the snow. There were no survivors, no witnesses, no reports back to command. Only corpses cooling in the frost and the first whispers of a phantom who could strike without being seen. By the second day, Soviet intelligence was alarmed. 12 men gone in one patrol. Then 15 more the next day. By the end of the first week, nearly 50 soldiers had been killed by an unseen sniper. Reports from the front spoke of teams of German-trained marksmen, or supernatural hunters. Stalin's generals insisted it was impossible for a single man to inflict such damage. They were wrong. To the Soviets, it seemed they faced a unit of elite assassins. In truth, it was only Simo, one farmer with one rifle and a lifetime of patience. By mid-December, Soviet soldiers whispered about the death zone, 5 square miles of woodland where men vanished. No radio calls, no survivors, only silence. Patrols began to refuse orders. Entire companies stalled, unwilling to march into the cursed forest. Commanders grew desperate. They ordered artillery strikes, pounding the woods with rockets and mortars for days at a time. Trees centuries old were blasted to splinters. The ground shook as though from an earthquake. And yet, when the bombardment ceased, Simo emerged from the snow unharmed. Tracks in the snow revealed he had simply waited it out in hidden caves, then returned to his hunt once the thunder faded. The Soviets had wasted thousands of shells, achieving nothing but exhaustion. That night, he struck again. 22 men fell in less than an hour. Each day, the legend grew. Soldiers began reporting phantom snipers. They fired at shadows, at trees swaying in the wind. Medical units treated dozens of men for what psychiatrists called forest syndrome, an inability to function in woodland combat, paralyzed by terror. To the Soviets, the White Death seemed inhuman, a spirit of the forest itself. But in truth, he was just one man, moving with discipline and cold determination. Every morning, Simo followed the same ritual. He left camp before dawn, tracked Soviet patrols all day, returned at night, cleaned his rifle with obsessive care, ate whatever food was available, and slept. Then he rose and did it again. Day after day. Week after week, his body endured unimaginable strain, 12 hours moving through snow, rifle and ammunition weighing him down, temperatures colder than ice itself. But his mind was steady, shaped by years of hunting in silence. By Christmas Eve 1939, his confirmed kills exceeded 100. The Finnish army offered him medals, promotions, even the chance to train others in safety. He refused. "I still have work to do," he said calmly. The rumors reached Moscow like snow carried on a cold wind. Whole patrols erased, officers falling without warning, radio calls that ended in a hiss of static. The generals insisted on patterns, on plans, on math that could be solved with more men and more steel. But the forest did not respect arithmetic. It respected patience. By mid-December, the Red Army sent its answer: counter-snipers, the best they had, men with medals and manuals and immaculate rifles. They spoke in the clipped language of doctrine and experience. They studied maps, wind charts, and sight lines. They set observation posts on ridge lines and timber cuts and river bends, places a book would call ideal. The book, however, was written for another winter. Simo watched them arrive from a distance that felt almost intimate, as though he were listening to strangers rehearse a familiar song. He noticed the glint first, a pinprick of sunlight trembling across a distant tree line. Expensive glass. Magnification. Precision. And death, if it found the wrong eyes at the wrong moment. He exhaled gently, the breath vanishing against his scarf. Iron sights only. The lesson had been carved by cold and light. In this air, a scope could betray you. In this silence, the tiniest click could mark your grave. He softened his jaw, let his shoulders settle into the earth, and moved his cheek a fraction along worn wood. He knew by touch better than sight. The first counter-sniper died to a glint, the second died to predictability, the third died to pride. By evening, the forest reclaimed its breath, and the men who had come to hunt the ghost became part of the story told to calm the terror of other men. The Soviets were not just losing soldiers anymore. They were losing certainty, that invisible armor that keeps fear from spreading between ribs and into the hands. Simo's discipline was not a miracle, it was ritual. He never fired from the same place twice. He never took more than 2 shots from a single hide, even when fate placed 3 or 4 perfect targets in a row like apples on a wall. He moved like water finds a new path, leaving behind nothing but rearranged snow and a memory of pressure in the earth. He chewed fresh snow before action to hide his breath in the air. He pressed his body into hollows whose shapes he had known since childhood, where roots and stone could break a silhouette into the suggestion of nothing. He learned the particular creak of bark at different temperatures, the heavy hush the sky wore when more weather was coming, the way a flock of small birds announced men long before human ears could. He set small, patient traps, no wire or steel, nothing that could be lifted and shown to a superior. His traps were expectations. A broken twig placed where an anxious boot would snap it. A faint trail leading toward a good firing position, the kind soldiers on a timetable would inevitably choose. A patch of snow brushed smooth so that the first print would look like a confession. Each day, the rhythm held. Before dawn, away from camp. All day, silent study and short, decisive violence. After dark, the long walk home across a map he carried in his bones. At night he cleaned the rifle with monastic care, ate without comment, and slept as if rest itself were part of his aiming. Artillery answered like thunder without rain. 3 days and 3 nights the forest shook, breathed ash, and sang with splinters. Snowmelt steamed over shattered roots. The Soviets meant to erase a ghost by erasing the world that housed it. When the barrage ended, reconnaissance units stepped carefully into a landscape that looked like the moon. In the churned drifts, they found tracks. Fresh. Ordinary. Human. The idea made some men angrier than they expected and others colder than the wind. 200 yards deeper, inside the root cave of a pine stubborn enough to survive centuries and 3 days of explosions, iron sights watched them. Simo did not feel triumphant. He felt the steady approach of another choice: shoot, move, breathe, endure. He did the work he knew and left the forest to hold the rest. That night, 22 bodies lay in angles the snow preserved without judgment. The rumor became a belief. The belief grew teeth. The Soviets built a headquarters in a captured Finnish schoolhouse, a room that smelled faintly of chalk and damp wool. Major Medvedev, the Union's most decorated marksman, spoke low and exact, rearranging red pins on a topographic map as if pattern alone could force the future to cooperate. Excellent discipline and training, he conceded, tapping a cluster of red X's. Multiple shooters. Coordinated angles. They shift positions like relay runners. They are not amateurs. He was wrong, of course, but not because he lacked skill. His experience was simply organized for another kind of war, one that behaved, one that told the truth at distances measured by glass and doctrine. At dawn, his plan went into the trees. By dusk, it did not return. Medvedev died at 400 yards to a shot that did not reflect the sun because it did not need to. The manual on his desk remained open to a page titled Counter-Sniper Triangulation. The wind turned the corner of that page slowly, politely, as a child might. Afterward, men spoke the major's name with respect and a small, careful silence. Even in loss, some things deserve the nod of the head. Fear learns fast. Within 2 weeks, units stalled at the edge of the death zone. Officers shouted, then pleaded, orders were written and rewritten, excuses took the shapes of supply delays and faulty radios. In the medical tents, a new phrase circulated among tired doctors: forest syndrome, hands that trembled at trunks, eyes that saw rifles in every branch, ears that could not unhear the memory of a single, tidy crack followed by nothing. The men wanted tanks, planes, something loud enough to drown out the idea that they were prey. Tanks bogged, planes found cloud, loud did not help. Quiet had the high ground. Simo did not celebrate. He marked weather in a small notebook, a habit older than war. He drank what was hot when he could. He listened to the quiet talk of men at his own campfires, jokes told too loudly, songs that held on to their last notes like rope. He allowed himself, sometimes, to picture the kitchen at home, the stove's red eye, the dry tick of the wood, his mother's hands worrying a cloth that did not need to be cleaned. He did not let the picture linger. Winter asks for attention. War demands it. In Moscow, patience thin to wire. Newspaper clippings reach the Kremlin. Finnish farmers halt Red Army. White Death haunts invaders. Stalin's parade stalls in snow. Propaganda answered with its own theater. Ghost soldiers, German tricks, but words froze badly in the same air that kept breath visible. I want this ended. Stalin said, his voice iron without heat. Immediately. The order created a shape the forest had never seen, a sweep, 1,000 men moving as one, an answer stitched from artillery, aircraft, radios, dogs, and doctrine. The plan was elegant on a chalkboard, cruel in its confidence. Squeeze the circle. Own the routes out. Press until the ghost has to become a man in the wrong place at the wrong time. Finnish intelligence heard the plan as a murmur through wires and snow. Major Jutalainen advised Simo to pull back, to rest, to give the storm its morning and move in the afternoon. Simo nodded, respectful, and returned to his cloth and oil. They're bringing enough men, he said, to make it interesting. He did not say what he was already building in his mind, a nest beneath the skin of the snow itself, stitched from patience and reed and the habit of being small and very, very still. Soviet patrols shifted to darkness, believing that night could make the forest less exacting. Night obeyed no one. It simply added a new column to the ledger, sound. Under a black sky, the ear learned to become the eye's brother. Simo followed the habits of frightened men the way a wolf follows the river that does not flood in winter. Men under stress choose the easiest path through drifts. They avoid open ground where their backs grow large in their own minds. They cluster by instinct into shapes a single bullet can address efficiently. In the dark, discipline and fear are close cousins. He did not judge them for it. He counted WWII New Year's. The count passed 100. The Finnish command offered him safety and rank, a position to teach instead of do. He smiled politely, the way a man smiles when he is grateful and unable to accept a gift without setting down something he cannot set down. I still have work, he said, not as defiance but as fact. Cold writes its memoir inside muscle and bone. Simo felt the winter in his fingers first, stiffness that liked to visit at dawn, then in his knees, a careful ache going downhill. His eyes burned at the edges some evenings, a blur he could blink away if he went slowly enough. He knew when to rest because the forest began to sound wrong, too far, too near, too many small noises asking to be important. He rested the way he fought, by plan. 8 hours. A fixed time at dusk for food. A fixed time at night for the cleaning that kept the rifle more alive than metal had any right to be in such air. The routine kept the mind from drifting into the thin places where fear waits dressed up as imagination. On clear afternoons he sometimes noticed a single crow, stubborn and black against the white, following him at a distance as though curious about this quiet animal that made other animals fall down and never rise. He said nothing to it, but in some corner of his mind he kept the crow like a clock. Sometimes war remembers a name. On January 15th, a lieutenant colonel brought from the east to solve the sniper problem, stepped into a gap between two trees during heavy snow, his cap pulled low against the sting. At 350 yards, the gap looked like a blink the forest forgot to complete. The shot threaded it anyway. Men looked up, not at the trees, not at the wind, not at the sky, but into themselves, to the small place where they keep a question nobody wants to ask. The answer was not comforting. He is everywhere we stand when we stop paying attention. By the end of the month, the nickname had outrun the men. Valkoinen kuolema. White Death. Newspapers wrote it the way they write a storm. Soviet radio replied with ghosts and gadgets, refusing a universe where a single farmer with discipline is more dangerous than a doctrine with medals. In camp, Simo warmed his hands around a mug and let his shoulders fall. He did not feel like a death. He felt like a man who understood a few things very well and refused to forget them while he breathed. The morning chose a sky like white slate. February 15th arrived with the measured confidence of men who had rehearsed. 1,000 soldiers advanced in overlapping arcs, radios crackling softly, dogs straining at harnesses, aircraft turning lazy circles above to draw lines in the snow with their shadows. Artillery observers counted seconds between coordinates, pencils sharp with certainty. The forest appeared to cooperate. No wind. Even light. The kind of day where the world holds still for a photograph. Simo lay under that stillness. He had spent 3 days shaping the earth to his outline, a shallow depression roofed with cloth that matched the snow so well it stole definition from anything that looked at it. Beneath the cloth, a reed waited at his lips, offering breath to the air without making a cloud. He had practiced the posture in autumn ponds, when ducks forget the shore is shallow and men remember how long a body can become water. Boots passed within 10 feet, the snow pushing down a little with each step, dusting his shelter with the ordinary noise of winter. One man stepped directly on the cloth and did not notice. The dogs grew interested, then bored. The officers kept their clipboards. Radios noted nothing at all. He did not move. Not for the first wave. Not for the second. He counted the rhythm, how the formation bunched to consult and stretched to proceed, how officers drew a small orbit of specialists around them, how radio men tried to be both near and invisible and achieved neither. He watched the artillery observer correct a line with his pencil, satisfied. When the shapes were exactly wrong for them and exactly right for him, Simo took 5 shots in 8 seconds. 2 officers fell into the same suggestive angle. 2 radio operators turned their heads in opposite directions as if listening to a voice they had not heard before. The observer sat down without meaning to and stayed seated. By the time panic found its legs, the shooter was not there anymore. Snow accepted the memory of a man and then lost it on purpose. Formation dissolved into instinct. Instinct became error. Error became the awful music of friendly fire. Radios filled with overlapping orders, then with noise that sounded like men trying to speak to weather. Above the swirl, aircraft banked, searching for a pattern. Patterns do not survive panic. And the forest, which had been asked to participate in a kind of parade, chose instead to practice stillness again. Across the line, morale did not drop so much as unravel. Veteran soldiers asked for transfers to other fronts with other terrors. New men arrived with bravado that melted like breath. In a farmhouse turned headquarters, Lieutenant Colonel Petrov, the latest mind assigned to this shame, drank bitter tea and read every line of every report with a professional stubbornness. He saw, as Medvedev had seen, excellent discipline and advanced training. He saw, as others had not, something else: consistency. Too consistent for a team with rotating leaders and varying skill. Too precise to belong to a chorus. He did his own math and came to a number that felt like an insult to the facts. 1. He did not say the number out loud. He ran a finger across the map, tracing the quiet geometry of a single human being who refused to be anywhere except where he could be everything at once. He designed decoy patrols that looked like desire itself, careless, tempting, late to radio, slow to turn. They vanished. He built triangulation nets that would have trapped a fox with a PhD in roads. The nets closed on nothing. He requisitioned more glass for more eyes. The eyes found only light. He asked artillery to draw a circle and close it. The circle looked perfect on paper and wrong in the snow. Petrov did not break. He narrowed. He reduced the problem the way a craftsman reduces a puzzle: remove the pretty, keep the necessary, trust the hand that works slowly. He told his men to stop imagining teams and start imagining a habit. Habits can be outweighted. Or so he hoped. Simo's hands ached in the evenings now, a deep, speaking ache that asked for heat and quiet. He gave them both. When sleep took him, it came like a white curtain. When it refused him, he did not argue. He lay with his eyes open and pictured his mother's kitchen again, the small glass with milk, the round loaf, the hush of a knife through bread. He pictured the stove tick. He pictured the door latch he had repaired as a boy and the way it clicked differently in winter and summer. He allowed the memory to slow his heart and smooth his breath. He allowed it to make the next day possible. Outside, the forest exhaled, a sound like fabric pulled through a narrow place. Men rested weapons across their knees and watched the edge of the trees as if the line itself were alive. In the dark, a crow, a single persistent clock, shifted branches and went quiet. Snow fell, patient as the work that waited. By late January, Soviet intelligence reports had become absurd. Whole platoons erased. Recon units silenced before their first radio call. Officers taken as if chosen from a list. The Red Army, which claimed hundreds of thousands of men, was whispering about one stretch of forest the way villagers whisper about a cursed well. Stalin's patience, already thin, frayed to threads. He demanded explanations, results, and punishment for failure. Commanders offered him charts and excuses. Stalin returned only silence and orders to fix it immediately. To the dictator, humiliation was worse than casualties. The world was watching, and the world was laughing. Into this pressure stepped Lieutenant Colonel Ivan Petrov, a man known for method, not myth. He had hunted snipers from Poland to the Caucasus, and he carried his reputation like a shield. Petrov believed in patterns. He trusted data, evidence, footprints, and reports. When he studied the Finnish forest, he saw not phantoms but a man, one man, he admitted finally to his staff, though the admission tasted like failure. Not a team. Not a ghost. A single shooter with impossible discipline. By New Year's Day, Simo had passed 100 confirmed kills. By mid-January, the tally exceeded 200. By February, men in Moscow spoke of 300, their voices low, their eyes doubtful. Numbers like that did not belong to reality. They belonged to myth, but myths were the currency of war. Finnish newspapers, desperate for morale, printed his growing record as if it were a weather forecast. Soviet broadcasts insisted he was not real, or at least not alone. Surely he was 50 Germans in disguise, or a team with secret technology. But among the men at the front, the truth was clearer. They had walked into the forest with 12 men and returned with none. Every kill was precise. No wasted bullets. No survivors. No mercy. Simo, meanwhile, did not think of numbers. He thought of routines. He thought of small adjustments, the way snow carried sound at different temperatures, the way tired soldiers grouped tighter in the cold, the way fear made men forget spacing. He thought of his rifle's bolts sliding forward with the sound of home. He thought of his mother's kitchen, the stove's warmth, and the smell of bread. He did not think of himself as a legend. He thought of himself as a hunter who still had work to do. Petrov laid his trap with care. He flooded the forest with patrols, loud enough, tempting enough, designed to be bait. Each group carried radios, reporting positions every 10 minutes. Artillery waited on call. Counter-snipers held flanking angles. The first patrol vanished. The second patrol's last words crackled across a radio. Contact. Contact. He's in the trees. Then silence. When a third patrol found the bodies, they were arranged in a line, each man shot cleanly through the head, spaced 50 meters apart as if placed there deliberately. The precision was chilling, mathematical, like the work of an unseen hand drawing neat columns on the ledger of death. Petrov studied the scene, his jaw tight. Not ghosts, he muttered. Not Germans. Not teams. A craftsman. But knowing the truth did not help him stop it. For Simo, the forest was both ally and executioner. It hid him, fed him, guided him. but it also punished him. His hands cracked with frostbite, blood crusting where skin split open. His joints stiffened with each dawn. His eyes blurred after hours of iron sight focus. Nights brought exhaustion so heavy he sometimes staggered back to camp like an old man, and yet, he rose again each morning, repeating the cycle. 0500 hours, move to position. 0600 to 1800, hunt. 1900, clean rifle, eat. 2100, sleep. No exceptions. No rest days, the discipline was its own armor. When his body begged for comfort, routine carried him through. When his mind whispered of fear, ritual silenced it. The forest became his second skin, his breath slowed until it was invisible, his body pressed into snow until even animals failed to notice him. By early March, the count reached staggering heights, kill 400. A Soviet captain leading a reconnaissance patrol, kill 450. A political commissar sent to discipline demoralized troops, kill 500. A full colonel commanding the 163rd Infantry Regiment, each shot carried not just a bullet but a message. No one was safe, not even leaders. The numbers seemed unreal, yet Soviet casualty reports confirmed them. Finnish soldiers began calling him Valkoinen Kuolema, the White Death. The nickname spread like wildfire, whispered by Soviet soldiers with terror, shouted by Finns with pride, printed by journalists across Europe, but Simo himself did not use the name. He remained quiet, his blue eyes calm, his words few. When offered promotions or safer duties, he simply shook his head. I still have work, he repeated, as though it were the only truth. March 6, 1940. The day was clear, the air brittle at -35°F. Simo lay in position, watching a Soviet supply route through his iron sights. It was routine, as it had been for over 100 days. What he did not know was that another hunter watched him. Senior Lieutenant Vasily Zaitsev, a Siberian sniper with skills nearly equal to Simo's, had tracked him for weeks. Patient, disciplined, silent, he had waited for this very moment. At 13:47 hours, Zaitsev fired. The bullet struck Simo's face, tearing away his jaw, shattering teeth, leaving a wound so catastrophic that medics who reached him hours later declared him dead at first glance. The round had been an explosive bullet, illegal under convention, designed to cause maximum damage, but Simo was not finished. Somehow, bleeding heavily, his face destroyed, he crawled 200 yards through deep snow to reach a Finnish patrol. His trail of blood was so vivid it remained visible for days. Doctors said survival was impossible. Yet he lived. He drifted for days between consciousness and shadow. Surgeons worked desperately, grafting bone, stitching flesh, improvising with techniques that barely existed. His face was nearly gone, his jaw obliterated, but his eyes remained clear and alive. When he finally woke, 11 days later, wrapped in bandages, his first words were muffled but steady. How many days have I lost? 11, the nurse whispered, tears in her eyes. Too many, Simo replied. I still had work to do. The Winter War ended soon after, with the Moscow Peace Treaty signed on March 13. Simo's battle was over, not by choice but by circumstance. His final tally, 542 confirmed kills in 105 days. An average of more than 5 men a day. The highest in sniper history. The Soviets celebrated his downfall in propaganda, declaring the White Death eliminated. Finnish newspapers printed his miraculous survival. International press marveled at the farmer-turned-sniper who had stopped an army corps nearly single-handedly. Simo, however, did not seek legend. He sought quiet. His body was broken, his face scarred beyond recognition, but his will remained unshaken. The war was over, yet in many ways, His story had only just begun. When the winter war ended, the forest did not applaud. It exhaled. Snow settled into the hollows left by boots and artillery. The trees, those that remained, held their silence like a vow, and the tracks of men faded into a smooth, indifferent white. In hospitals from Helsinki to field tents barely warmer than the air outside, the wounded slept. Some woke and found the world again. Some did not. Simo woke. The surgeons called it a miracle, but miracles are simply the moments when craft and stubbornness meet. His jaw had been shattered, his cheek destroyed, his face a map rewritten in fire. Bone grafts were taken, set, and pinned. Flesh was stitched, unstitched, stitched again. Infection threatened, retreated, tried again, and lost. Nurses learned the language of his eyes because bandages swallowed every other expression. When he was too tired to form words, his gaze did the speaking. How long? How far? What next? They brought him a small mirror when the worst was over. He did not look at it for 3 days. When he finally did, he regarded the stranger there without shock or self-pity, the way a farmhand inspects a broken tool he has repaired well enough to use again. He tilted the mirror slightly to catch a different light. He put it down. The nurse took his hand, and he let her, as if remembering that human warmth and firelight are related inventions. Reporters tried to get in. Commanders tried to visit. Dignitaries sent remarks wrapped in ribbons. The doctors, protective as winter, refused almost everyone. They allowed one man through on a gray morning when the sky pressed low to the window. Field Marshal Mannerheim, quiet, formal, carrying neither speech nor parade. He did not speak long. Men who have seen too much seldom do. He thanked Simo for what could not be measured, told him that his nation would not forget, and left behind a promotion certificate with a signature neat as frost on glass. Simo looked at the paper as if it were a weather report, accurate, important, and not meant for the heart. He nodded, once, and closed his eyes. Healing is a practice. Day after day, the small humiliations of recovery stacked themselves into a staircase and dared him to climb. He learned to sip, then to chew, then to speak around the seams of a new face. Words came back as if they belonged to another man and had to be borrowed for a while. The first sentence that sounded fully his own arrived without warning. The light is good today. The nurse smiled. She had been waiting for that sentence, any sentence that honored the day instead of the wound. They asked him about the number. He shrugged with his eyes, a gesture he had perfected behind bandages. He did not keep his own tally. The forest had counted because it counts everything. The army had counted because armies must. He remembered faces less than postures, angles more than names, weather more than dates. He remembered 1,000 small things that could, when arranged in the right order, end a human life from far away. He did not boast. He did not confess. When young officers asked for rules, he gave them tasks. Spend an hour and watch how snow accepts a single leaf. Then tell me what you saw, he said. Hold your breath until your heart complains, then learn to breathe so that it does not. Find a ridge where the wind forgets to be loud. Wait until you can name its silence. The lessons were not romantic. They were chores for the mind. The students who understood returned with notebooks full of useless poetry that wasn't useless at all. The students who wanted shortcuts found none. Spring arrives late in Karelia, and when it comes, it does not trumpet, it loosens. Ice loses its manners first, cracking in long, surprised sighs. Snow sinks into itself until brown grass remembers it has a job. Tractors cough to life. Men speak more loudly in courtyards, Women beat rugs with a rhythm that sounds like work returning to its shape. Simo left the hospital when the trees were still undecided. He returned to Rajjarvi with a face rebuilt by other hands, a body thinner than it had any right to be, and a walk that paused half a heartbeat before stairs. His mother answered the door as if she had been standing behind it since November. She did not cry. She pressed her forehead to his chest and breathed, and the house felt whole again. Above the fireplace, a space waited where the rifle had once hung. He did not replace it. The rifle lay wrapped in cloth beneath the bed as if Winter had simply gone downstairs to check the locks. Neighbors visited, bringing bread that still breathed steam, jars of jam, a ham cured as carefully as a secret. They stood in the doorway too long, awkward in their gratitude, as if thanks could bruise a man. He ushered them in with the old economy of a farmer, coats here, boots there, so that hospitality could save everyone from eloquence. At night, when the stove ticked and the house settled into itself, he slept. The dreams were not violent. They were detailed. He dreamed of iron sights finding longer and longer distances, of breath held so well that minutes behaved like seconds, of the exact weight of a cartridge between two fingers. He woke with his heart steady and lay there until the roof taught him again how to wait. Stories grew around him like tall grass. In Helsinki, a writer described him as a snow-born spirit who came when men trespassed in the wrong woods. In Moscow, a broadcaster insisted he had been a German invention, optics and trickery and tall tales. In Stockholm and London, columnists flattened him into a headline, "The White Death, 5 men a day." Numbers travel easily. Nuance does not. When journalists found the farmhouse, he met them on the steps, cap in hand. They expected a wolf pelt, medals, maybe a glint that explained how one man could draw so many neat dots on the map of war. They found a quiet man with careful manners and a jaw that turned slightly when he smiled. He poured coffee. He answered questions that would not injure anyone. He did not correct the rest. "Is it true you never used a scope?" a young reporter asked, stubbing his pencil against the margin like a nervous habit. "Yes," Simo said. "Why?" "Because light is sharper than glass in winter," he said simply, and the reporter wrote that down as if it were a riddle, which it was, and also an answer. Another journalist, older and tired of his own voice, lowered his notepad. "Did you hate them?" he asked, and seemed surprised at his own question. "No," Simo said, after a time long enough to matter. Hate takes attention away from what must be done. It was not the quote they wanted, but it was the truth he could carry. Every farm collects a companion suited to its owner. Simo chose a dog that liked to listen. He found the pup in a late summer litter, a small, observant creature whose ears seemed to grow a little before the rest of him caught up. The dog learned the house, which board spoke underfoot, where the sun remembered to visit in morning, which chair meant a hand would be still and high enough for a head to find. They walked the edge of fields in the evenings. The dog would stop, nose raised, and Simo would stop too, recognizing that there are languages older than words. When hunters came in autumn to ask whether he would join them for moose, he went sometimes and sometimes not. On the days he went, he did not hurry the shot. On the days he stayed, he swept the barn. He spoke to the dog the way one speaks to the weather, rarely, and with respect. Young soldiers found their way to him as birds find a lake, by direction rather than address. They came with the ordinary reverence of apprentices who have heard about a master and hope to borrow even a button of his coat. He kept them no longer than he kept the seasons. He gave them tasks and sent them back to their units with fewer assumptions and more patience. One brave boy asked the question none of the others could shape into sound. "How do you carry it?" he blurted, all at once, as if pain could be unloaded in a single lift. Simo did not pretend not to understand. He held the boy's gaze until the ground itself seemed to be listening. "You carry less than you imagine," he said at last, "and more than you can say." The boy nodded, because sometimes wisdom is a door you are not yet old enough to open. He went back to the road with a notebook full of advice about wind and posture, and a silence that would grow into understanding at its own speed. There were ceremonies he could not escape, charities that needed a face to share with the faces who needed a meal. When the city called, he put on a suit that fit rooms with chandeliers and polished floors. He shook hands. He accepted medals as one accepts a package that really belongs to the whole village. He was asked to speak. He thanked the organizers, named the men who were not there to be thanked, and sat down. Afterward, a woman with a voice trained for radios asked him if he dreamed of battle. "No," he said, and then he surprised himself by adding, "I dream of weather." "What kind?" she said, "professional enough to lean in, the kind that teaches you something," he said, and she laughed, not unkindly, and wrote it down as if it were poetry. It was, but not the kind that wins prizes. On the farm, things break. Hinge pins go soft. Handles split. Rope remembers it is made of smaller ropes. Simo moved through these small wars with a craftsman's affection, the same meticulous attention he once reserved for a rifle's bolt. He carried a tin with screws sorted into the old arithmetic, this many for doors, this many for chairs, this many for the day you cannot predict. His face healed into a map that did not ask for pity. The scars were not a banner, they were a ledger entry. Children looked, then looked away, then looked again, the way they look at thunder when it is far enough to be beautiful. He tipped his cap to them and kept walking, and in a year they stopped looking. On winter nights, when the dark arrived before supper and left after breakfast, he would add a sliver of wood to the fire and listen to how the flame answered. He had learned to recognize the sound of different trees burning, birch talkative and bright, pine sappy and impulsive, alder modest and even. He respected the discipline of ash. Even fuel has character, and a life is little more than learning which characters hold a room without taking it over. Some days, memory arrived like mail with no stamps. He would be sweeping the side of the barn and suddenly hear the exquisite small sound a cartridge makes when it slides into patience. He would stand in a doorway and understand exactly how far the horizon was by the width of light at its edge. He would feel air cling to his skin in a way that meant snow in 2 days and wind tomorrow before dusk. These were not intrusions. They were reunions with a part of himself that had not died or grown monstrous. He had met violence with skill, but he had trained the skill long before men gave it a purpose that made newspapers. In the proper order of things, technique serves work, work serves life, life serves love. War had scrambled the order. Peace, slowly, was restacking the shelves. He had no sermons to preach about it. He had a gate to repair, a dog to feed, and a mother who preferred her tea at a certain hour. These are the rails on which a day moves safely. Years passed. The world did what it always does to legends, filed off edges, polished the middle, sold it back to itself in songs and speeches. Now and then, a stranger with an accent arrived at the gate, asking for the White Death, as if the nickname were a farmhouse he could point to on a map. One summer afternoon, a young historian from far away stood at the fence with a notebook and the air of a man who has read too much about a thing and hopes to read the rest on your face. He did not ask for numbers. He asked for the shape of days. What did the morning sound like before a good shot? He said, very small. Simo answered, and after? Even smaller. The historian nodded, puzzled and satisfied at once, the way a man might look after tasting an herb he cannot name but thinks he might grow. He left behind a letter addressed to no one, really, a page of thanks for the right to stand where a particular silence had once been loud. Simo folded it twice and placed it in a drawer with a handful of other papers that time did not erase, a promotion certificate, a brittle newspaper clipping with his name spelled correctly for once, a child's drawing of a man and a dog, and something that might be a tree or might be a rifle. Another winter arrived, and another. The rhythm of snow and thaw organized the months. Simo's steps shortened and slowed, then learned a new confidence particular to older men, not less certain, just more deliberate. If he spoke of the war, he did so the way farmers speak of a storm that tore off a roof long ago, with exactness, without sentiment. When asked what he was proudest of, he surprised himself. "I never fired carelessly," he said. Not once. It was not bravado. It was a craftsman's oath. To handle a tool, any tool, without respect is to surrender your name to chaos. He had used the worst tool humanity ever forged with more care than most men use their best. If pride was allowed anywhere in that sentence, it could stay there. Now and then the army sent for him, not to parade him but to borrow his attention. He stood before rooms full of faces that would soon go where orders sent them. On the chalkboard he drew less than they expected, a line for wind, a curve for terrain, an eye for light. He wrote 3 words where they expected formulas: patience, posture, purpose. You can learn to shoot from a book, he said, but you cannot learn to wait there. Waiting is a practice. Like prayer, if you pray. Or like milking. Or like forgiving. A hand rose. Forgiving who? Yourself, most days, he said, and the room went quiet in the useful way rooms sometimes do. He showed them how to rest elbows without cutting blood, how to let cheek and would become the same temperature, how to let breath fall through the nose so gently that even winter cannot find it. He never said kill. He said break the problem. Language matters when you intend to remain human. On a December evening years after the treaty, the village gathered as villages do when calendars decide to be ceremonial. Candles. Bread sliced with the same knife that had cut rope that morning. Children thumping across floors in boots not meant for dancing. Grown-ups pretending they still liked dancing until the children believed them and then it became true again. Simo stood near the back, as if he were still a second son in a crowded room. Someone put a mug in his hand. Someone else pressed a warm roll into his other hand. He listened to a hymn that sounded exactly like snow falling steadily, no drama, only accumulation. An old comrade came, a man who had shared a trench, a joke, and once half a cigarette, and put his arm around Simo in a way that said both we are here and we are not all here. They did not tell stories. They let the hymn carry what could be carried. Later, at home, his mother placed one extra plate at the table and said nothing. He did not ask for whom. The absent deserve a place as long as someone can wash the dish afterward. When the dog grew old and the winters seemed heavier, they walked shorter paths. One evening they reached the river just as the water forgot to show ripples and instead became a sheet of tin. He stood, the dog sat, and together they watched nothing happen in a very satisfying way. He found a flat stone and sent it skimming, an old boy's pride waking in the wrist. 4 skips. 5. The dog's ears flicked at each small slap. Across the river a heron reconsidered its profession and stayed. Simo thought, not of men, not of numbers, not of newsprint, but of the way a sight picture settles when the world agrees with your decision. He thought of how seldom the world agrees, and how little it owes you when it does. He turned to go, and the dog rose in a groan that was also a bow. They walked home, 2 moving shapes. The dark folded into its pocket without misplacing. Eventually, the visits grew fewer. The phone rang less. The mailbox, never crowded, gave up and became a place for spiders to try their luck. He did not resist the shrinking of days, he let them become denser instead. He found satisfactions that do not read well, a hinge that swings true for 20 winters, a fence line that stays plumb when the ground would rather wander, a stove that lights on the first match because yesterday you cleaned what no one will ever thank you for cleaning. When asked, rarely now, what he believed the war had taught him, he answered the way a man answers when he knows sermons can be a kind of showing off. That the line between skill and mercy is thin, he said, and worth guarding. And then, because it was the kind of evening that wanted another sentence, he added, and that patience outlives everything else. He returned to his chair. The stove replied with a pop that sounded like agreement. Outside, the wind changed direction, and the house noticed but did not object. On a late winter morning, the kind that keeps frost in the corners of the glass until noon, someone knocked. He opened the door to find a boy who was not quite a boy anymore, carrying a hat in both hands the way one carries hope. "You told me once to listen to snow," the visitor said, shivering from nerves, not cold. "I did. I think I know what you meant." Simo smiled with one side of his mouth that still remembered the old way. "Good," he said, and stood aside so the young man could enter the kitchen, where the kettle had decided on its own that company was probable. The lesson continued, as lessons do when they are real, not as lecture but as practice, not as thunder but as weather that does the work of rivers. There is a way the elderly sleep that resembles prayer. The breath learns to go where it is most needed and not to argue when it must wait. On such a night years later, Simo lay down as he always did, on the side that made the ache less articulate. He turned his face to where the stove's glow wrote a red line across the floor and let the room do the rest. No one hears the exact second a life crosses the threshold, because time is not a door with a latch. Morning came. The house received it. The kettle, accustomed to certain rituals, waited for a hand that did not arrive. The dog, already asleep inside another story, did not rise. His mother had gone before him, his comrades had found their own ways through. On the table, a folded cloth made a shadow like a bookmark. If the forest noticed, it did what forests do with news, it turned it into rings. The legend outlived the men, legends are built for that. Museums found shelves for medals, glass for certificates, diagrams for rifles. A placard summarized him poorly for schoolchildren who would remember the numbers and forget the weather. Writers argued over how many, over which day, over whether iron sights alone could make such arithmetic. Historians squinted at archives and called it astonishing but plausible, which is how history sometimes bows. But somewhere that was not a museum, in a farmhouse that had finally learned to be quiet, a drawer held a little stack of paper no one would frame, an old promotion, a letter without postage, a child's drawing that might be a tree or a rifle. The window above the sink held winter in the corners the way a man holds something he does not want to drop or keep, and in the larger drawer of the world, the one the forest keeps, the lessons remained for anyone stubborn enough to open it, that patience is a weapon only if you let it be a kindness first, that skill without posture is noise, that breath can be invisible even when the air wants to make a cloud of you, that hatred is a poor ration for long work, that the line between being excellent and being human is a string you must tune every day. The snow, if asked, would add one more, that silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of attention. History has a habit of remembering men in numbers. 42 missions. 500 kills. 1 war. But numbers are thin garments for a life, and they fit badly when draped across shoulders that have carried more complicated weight. For Simo, the record was simple: 542 confirmed kills in 105 days. No sniper before or since has matched such precision in so little time. Military historians debate the plausibility, checking reports, weighing Soviet casualty lists against Finnish claims. The arithmetic, however, was only the surface. Beneath it lay a man whose silence was deeper than his statistics. He did not boast of the record. He did not tell long stories in taverns or parade his face in memoirs. When asked later in life how he managed such numbers, his reply was almost disarming: by practice, by patience, by being invisible. When Finland signed the Moscow Peace Treaty on March 13, 1940, soldiers packed away rifles, burned old maps, and tried to become farmers, shopkeepers, sons, and fathers again. For many, the transformation was impossible. Simo returned to his farm. His face bore the scars of the bullet that should have ended him. His jaw was rebuilt, his cheek marked forever, but his blue eyes retained the calm patience of the hunter who once waited hours for a deer to step into the clearing. He avoided public attention whenever possible. He attended no parades. He made no speeches about glory. For him, survival was enough, and the quiet life of a farmer was reward enough after the deafening roar of artillery, but the world refused to leave him alone. The legend of the White Death grew larger each year. Children in Finland learned his story in school. Foreign journalists described him as a ghostly figure, a snow-clad phantom who taught the Soviet Union humility. Soviet veterans muttered his name as if it were a curse. When asked decades later whether he hated the Russians he had killed, Simo gave an answer that baffled many: I did what I was told. I did it as well as I could. I had nothing against them personally. It was not hatred that had guided his rifle. It was duty. Duty to his homeland, duty to his people, duty to the stubborn principle that no neighbor has the right to take another's land by force. Hatred is noisy. Hatred burns through patience. Hatred clouds the eye and trembles the hand. Patience, on the other hand, is quiet. It sharpens vision. It steadies. And so it was patience, not hatred, that wrote the White Death's reputation across the snows of Karelia. In later years, Simo was invited to interviews and gatherings. He rarely accepted. When he did, he offered short answers, like a man trimming wood carefully to avoid waste. Did you really kill 500 men? Someone would ask. I did what was needed. He would reply, did you feel fear? Everyone feels fear. The question is what you do with it. Why did you refuse a scope? Glass gives you away. Iron does not. He never described himself as a hero. Heroes, in his view, were the men who did not return, the men who lay beneath the soil of forests that still whisper when the wind turns east. Military academies study him to this day. They trace the simplicity of his techniques: move constantly, never fire twice from the same position, point 2 shots maximum, then relocate, hide your breath with snow in your mouth, trust iron sights over fragile optics, treat patience as a weapon sharper than any bullet. But beyond the manuals and tactics, Simo's deeper lesson remains: endurance is built in silence. He had no speeches, no fiery rhetoric. He simply rose each morning, followed his routine, and refused to surrender. His example teaches that greatness is often the result of ordinary disciplines repeated faithfully under extraordinary circumstances. The Karelian forests where Simo once waited are quieter now. The trenches are softened by moss. The roads where Soviet boots thundered are overgrown with birch and pine. The snow still falls, covering everything in the same indifferent white. Visitors walk those woods today with cameras and guidebooks. They see no ghosts, only trees and silence. But if you stop, if you breathe carefully and let the stillness press against you, you can almost imagine the weight of unseen eyes, the calm of a hunter who once made an army fear the sound of its own footsteps. The forest has chosen its verdict. It keeps the memory without judgment. Simo lived quietly until old age, tending his farm, caring for dogs, speaking sparingly with neighbors. He hunted again, not men, but elk and birds, with the same patience that had carried him through war. He never married, never sought the stage of politics or the acclaim of soldiers' reunions. He preferred chores. Fixing a hinge. Cutting wood. Watching the seasons change. He found meaning in the small repairs that make a house endure another winter. To many, that simplicity was shocking. How could the deadliest sniper in history live like a modest farmer? But to Simo, the question was reversed. How could a farmer live any other way? In his final decades, Simo spoke more freely to young people who asked, not about killing, but about patience, about skill, about the dignity of work. He described how to hold a rifle, yes, but also how to hold silence. Silence is heavier than noise, he told one interviewer in his 80s. It teaches you what to notice. He died in 2002, at the age of 96. Finland honored him with full military respect. Newspapers across the world carried his obituary, reminding readers of the farmer who became the White Death, but perhaps the forest itself offered the truest obituary, a snowfall the night he died, blanketing the land in white, erasing tracks, softening edges, returning everything to quiet. As a sleep story, Simo's tale is not meant to glorify death. It is meant to show endurance, patience, and the strange way ordinary skills can meet extraordinary moments. It reminds us that beneath uniforms and battles are human beings who once milked cows, repaired fences, and watched the sky for weather. The White Death was not a monster. He was a man. A son, a farmer, a hunter who loved the silence of the woods. His legend grew beyond him, but his life remained rooted in simple things: discipline, patience, and a quiet refusal to surrender. As you lie here, listening to this story, let your mind rest the way Simo once rested in the snow. Notice your breath, gentle and slow, invisible to the world but steady within you. Feel the patience of your body as it sinks into the bed, as the muscles let go of their work. Think of the forest, calm and vast, its silence not empty but full of listening. Imagine the snow covering the ground, softening every edge, turning even the harshest shapes into smooth lines. Let that snow cover you too, not with cold, but with quiet, the deep quiet of rest. The story of Simo Haya, the White Death, shows us that patience can outlast fear, that silence can be stronger than noise, that even the smallest person can stand against giants when the cause is just now. Let that lesson become your comfort. The world can wait. The forest can keep its watch. Tonight, your only duty is to rest, drift deeper. As snow drifts down, drift softer. As silence becomes complete, drift into sleep, carrying only patience.